Hello.
Hi Mark, how you doing?
Yes. Long time no see, huh?
Indeed, indeed. Let me see if I can get my video working. Uh, hello, hello. Um, I think it's just us on the agenda. He's there by default, but I'm not sure if he's gonna make it today. Um, I was just looking over your template RFC. I'll get us kicked off anyway. I'll just quickly open the agenda and all right, here we go. Uh, Welcome to the secondary working group for September 2025. By being here, we've all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, the code of conduct, links to all of which are in the agenda if anyone wants to read them. And we also know that these meetings are recorded, published to YouTube, and that we use large language models and AI tools to do summaries. So we'll start with an introduction of attendees. My name is Benji. I'm from GraphQL. Hi, everyone.
Hello. I'm from Mark from Yelp. Well, I am Mark from Yelp. Hello.
Awesome. I don't think we'll be taking notes because it's just the two of us, so we'll have to rely on the AI for that. Um, and I'm going to skip over the ready to review agenda items so we can get straight into the meat of the topic. And that is you, Mark. Take it away.
Hello. Yeah, so this is something that came out of the GraphQL conference that we had last week. And it was very good timing. Someone at my company said, "Hey, how do I do this thing?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't see like an official way to do this, but I'm in a room full of experts, so I'll ask them." Yeah, and basically it's this matches directive thinking. We put up the spec. And I can do like a 2-minute introduction for the thousands of people I'm sure they're going to watch this on YouTube later. So let me share the screen. I've seen it. Okay, here we go. So this is like the super minimal representation of the problem. So you have a field that returns a list of unions or interfaces or types that implement interfaces. So it returns a list of polymorphic types. And the current version of the query can only support book and movie, specified by this union here. But then what if, next week, the schema decides to add a new type to this union, like the opera type. And so, old versions of the query can't render an opera type. It doesn't know how. It's not in its view of the schema. And so the way that we generally solve this, or as is a common pattern, is to provide a support. Or I think Benji suggested like an only argument to say that to sort of declare in your query that I only know how to render books and movies in my UI. So don't even bother trying to send me any operas because I'll throw them away. And this is particularly a problem if you do anything that resembles server-driven UI. So if you have like 5 slots in your UI and you need to show 5 items, otherwise you're like losing ad clicks or whatever, then you want the server to return you exactly 5 compatible items. And so that's where this, extra argument comes into play, because then the resolver can read this argument and say, okay, from all the possible things I could return you, I'm just going to filter and only send you 5 books or movies. Hopefully that sort of explains the problem. And it turns out that Relay already has a match directive. So as I was like writing this RFC, I was like, I wonder what I wonder what they call it, and they already named it exactly what I was gonna name it, which was match, because that kind of mirrors include. as the singular form rather than plural form. So basically, the way that I don't know, Benji, you probably already know this, but I'm saying this for the crowd real quick. The way that the relay directive works is that let me see if I can pull this up real quick. So you would tag. Where do I put this? I'm zooming quite a lot here somewhere. Okay, so you would add this directive on the argument, and then the relay compiler would take a query that looks like this.
You're still sharing the pull request
Thank you.
1817.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm not very good at computers. Okay, let's zoom back over here. Okay, so the match or matches directive you would apply on the arguments that they're adding. And so as a human, you would write something that looks like this, and then everything kind of works. But the problem, or the thing we want to avoid, is we're dumb humans with our stupid human brains, and we might typo these things, or maybe we might add things that like don't exist in the schema. It's duplicative. You could do it as enums instead. But again, that's kind of like duplicative. People generally don't like when you're not dry, and you have to kind of like manually maintain that one-to-one mapping of possible things in a list of unions to the enum. So what relay does is quite clever. So it avoids the need to kind of write that that argument entirely. So as a human, you would just write something like this, and you would just in your selection set say, give me some books, give me some movies, and then the relay compiler at build time would sort of inspect this and say, okay, you want books, you want movies, bada bing, bada boom. I'm going to put this into an array and pass that using arguments. And this is like guaranteed to be safe against the schema, because you will have already verified that like this is a valid query against your schema. And since this is a compile step, you can kind of like follow that chain of trust and say that these are going to be valid as well. So that's quite neat. But that doesn't work for all clients. Not all clients have a compiler step. And so we want to get back to something that avoids the need to duplicate type names. Like we want a solution that removes the need to duplicate declared members of the union into an enum, kind of like maintaining that. We want to remove that, and we also want a thing that guarantees the safety. And so if I go back to
Do you mind if I just cut in for a moment here, Mark?
Yeah, please do.
So just for anyone else who's watching this, you might be wondering, why can't we just use the selection set itself? We see that it's got book and movie here. Why can't we just know that those are the only types and thus only return these from the get media field? And the reason for that is essentially because of the way that GraphQL works, and specifically because of how we want to use normalized caching with this. If you had two different areas in your application, and one of them queried book and movie, and another one queried book and opera, the selection set wouldn't normally be part of the signature that you would use in the normalized store. The normalized store would normally use the field name and any arguments, build a signature from that, and store the results. So these two different selection sets on here would cause conflicts in the rendering. Nodes would appear that shouldn't be there, or would disappear that should be there. And it would basically break the way that GraphQL is assumed to work. And that's because GraphQL resolves according to the resolver algorithm and the execution algorithm on a layer by layer basis. So when it resolves the get media field, it doesn't yet know what the selection set is, and it shouldn't factor it in. So we effectively need a way to send the information of what we care about in that selection set so that it becomes part of the request to the get media field itself directly. You already know that, of course,
I,
Mark, because we discussed this. But yeah, this is just for anyone watching.
yeah. I wonder if this is like also potentially an issue. This is kind of in the same vein, but maybe a little easier to understand. So if you issue this query and then like later on in the browser, a few seconds later, you might issue this query. Would this be like a cache hit?
Yeah,
But like
so
with bad data?
Relay could look at this and say, oh yeah, I've already got the get media field uh, with no arguments, so I can resolve that from cache. And when I do so, I find that what I have in there is, let's say, a book, and a book isn't a movie, so I'm just going to return an empty object, and that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what we obviously are desiring for this query to give us.
Right, because again, you're going to get you need like the client saying, I want this number of items, or like I want something here. So this is sort of like, I guess, a first in that was sort of like encoding extra meaning in the query itself, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I just
Like,
want to clarify as well. What I said before isn't quite right. Like here, Relay would know that we haven't requested those fields on movie, and so it would require to populate the cache. So it would actually be another network fetch, but
I think relay,
it might
yeah,
corrupt what was previously rendered for the previous fetch.
right. My well, I'm not a relay user, but my like vague understanding here is that relay would see these as two different things because it does that compile step and it would become two different arguments, and so two different network calls, and that's fine. But maybe like Apollo or like a dumber sort of clients might just kind of see, oh, you want like the get media field with no arguments, therefore that's a cache hit. I don't know.
Um, I also am not familiar with this pattern in Relay, but it would only be able to do that if the schema supported you passing this matches argument to the get media
Right,
field. Otherwise, there's no way of expressing to the schema that I want it filtered to only these things. And
right.
that's essentially what we're doing here, right? We're talking about a filter. It'd be the same as like adding a where clause in SQL. It's just adding a
Yes.
filter to the field itself. It's just the filter is um, redundant against the list of types that you have in your selection set.
Right. Um, so getting back to the RFC itself, let me share this tab. This is the proposal of what I think that we could support. So this does not do the relay thing in that like relay has this magic compile step, but we're just gonna kind of be human compilers here. So we're gonna pass a string in this supports a list of strings here. And then it being a string means you don't need to kind of maintain that mapping of enum values to possible union members in that list. So it's a bit drier, but you might say, but these are strings. Strings are scary. Bah. But okay, so that's like the magic of the RFCs that we're going to go ahead and like validate that this is all safe, and that these actually match type names that you might pass in here. The full spec of this directive, and this is like stage 0. So what I'm presenting here will almost definitely change. But step 0 here is it looks like this. We have a path and a sort thing. We'll get into what these mean a little later. But I think what this means for clients like Relay, so Jordan kind of agreed with this, which is that um, they would be able to use this spec as a compile target. So Relay wouldn't really need to change. It would just kind of be like an extra quality of life improvement for Relay users. They would compile down to this directive. They would get the server validation as well. And for clients like Apollo, where there's no compile step, you would need to kind of like manually pass in that argument, but it's going to be validated on the server. Possibly there might be some client side validation they could do as well, but that's, I think, would be outside of this spec. Anyway, um, there's a whole bunch of edge cases here. I think they're all solvable. I hope. I'm willing to try. But another like high level point is that Lee in person shared that he was thinking of this problem as well, and that he had some sort of syntax extension proposal, which I'll be honest, it sounded good at the time, and I think I understood it at the time, but when I came to write this RFC, I couldn't quite remember, I couldn't quite follow exactly. So yeah, I'm hoping that Lee will be able to provide some insights there. And it's also entirely possible that this RFC like just could get thrown away, and he kind of puts out another RFC, which would be great. Either which way to solve the problem is good. But this is this is my stab at doing this in a sort of more incremental way. Yeah, before we get on to the path and sort arguments, I'll pause for applause, questions, thoughts, comments from the crowd.
That'll be my cue to speak. So this is like an actual problem. This is an issue in GraphQL, right? This is why Relay, for example, has this 3D pattern matching system. This is a common issue that people need to deal with, especially if we are doing servant-driven UI. It's quite common with that, where you have like a list of supported fragments or supported types that you're expecting, and you want to be able to render any one of those. And then in future, maybe your server suddenly supports additional fields, and now not fields, sorry, types. And now you need to, like, your client can't handle those other ones. It doesn't want to render those other ones. So it's just, and it hasn't selected on those selection sets. So it's just getting empty objects, which aren't useful. And if you've decided, hey, I want to render 5 of these, it's no good if you get 3 of them coming through of things you support and 2 that you don't support that are just empty objects, because now you've got blanks on the screen, or you've not rendered enough stuff on your, let's say, your Netflix, video selection of here are the latest items we recommend you watch. So this is definitely an issue. There is also a related issue, which is user confusion. Quite a lot of people think that the fact that you've selected these particular types means that those are the only types that should be selected anyway. And they expect that that's how it works. And so they're surprised when they do this and say, if it's a dog, give me this. If it's a cat, give me this. And they end up with an empty object. And they're like, why do I have this empty object? It's because it's a fish. And you didn't tell us what fields you need if it's a fish, but it is a fish and it does exist. So here's an empty object. So it's a bit confusing to users anyway. And one of the issues that, like, you've hinted at a number of times here is this is essentially redundant information. It's not truly redundant, but it feels like it to the user. Like, I've given you the list of fragments. These are the only ones that I care about. I shouldn't also need to tell you up here that it's that same list and have to keep growing it. So it does feel like a syntactical solution to this might be the more correct approach. That said, the execution model of GraphQL is fields and is a parent object and arguments, and then you go and get the thing, and that's really all you should be using. In GraphQL.js, we have the parent object, the arguments, and we also give you a context object and resolve info, which like just gives you all sorts of AST related stuff that you can use. But according to the GraphQL spec itself, the only things that you should really be using is the parent object and the arguments. So what this is doing is saying, here's an argument that applies this filter based on what I'm selecting. I like that, and it mirrors what we're doing currently. One thing that I find problematic here is the use of string. I understand that not everyone wants to define that list of enums, but the enums are more technically correct. They're also more like auto-completable by current tooling. Sure, you could teach tooling that this match directive exists and then teach it to do the autocomplete as well, but an enum is much more natural. I would probably push to allow both. So there are schemas out there already that use enums. I know because that's the style that I use when I need to solve that problem. There are also strings, as we can see from Relay. So I would just allow the system to support both. But if there is an enum, then the enum value should match exactly the type name, and there should be a validation rule that ensures that that is the case. Also, with the enum, it doesn't necessarily have to be exhaustive. Like you could allow it to only to filter to only like book and movie and not worry about opera, which is interesting. But that's my feedback so far. I haven't read the full proposal yet.
So just to kind of okay, so there's like three possible solutions here. Number one is what I currently propose in the RFC. Number two is Lee's mysterious syntax change, which yeah, I don't know. And then I'm gonna kind of scribble down what I think you're saying here, which is so like this is what you would do manually, right? But
Yes.
then
So you say
um
manually, but like I use auto generation, so
you use auto generation. Okay. So let's do a string here. But like some you're maybe suggesting, again, this is my interpretation of what you're saying, please correct me, but like maybe some like validation rule, compile step, something to remove the human elements of maintaining this thing, because then this would become
I'm not too bothered about that. I would, in your matches directive that you had before, for your string, I would still have that. And that would be enough, right? Because you're just saying it matches, and instead of it matching a string, it matches this enum. And that is, again, enough to say, well, this enum needs to represent only the sensible values for this area. So essentially, the fact of matches being there implies that the get media support types needs to reflect the types available in media.
so this matches directive is applied on the field of this, oh, sorry, on the argument of this field. It's not applied on this enum directly. So, but like we would want some kind of ideally um, like validation rule of the SDL to say that like this does in fact mirror this, I think.
So I would say it's an issue with the matches directive. So the error would be you've applied the matches directive to this field, this argument, sorry, supports, and you've used an enum value, but that enum value doesn't have the correct types for media. So I would see that not as a
Okay.
bug in the enum type, but as a bug in the matches directive, or specifically in the argument. Now, if they do align, then everything's fine.
So it would be a bug in like the user trying to apply the enum to this field. Okay, so then
So it's the
rather
same as
than
string, except string allows all of your types.
okay, so you could do something like whatever foo. Um this is valid as an enum. You might theoretically maybe use this somewhere else, but it would be an issue. Hmm.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion right now. Like at the moment, my enum that I use is auto-generated, so it always matches media exactly. And it's called something like media types. And it's just a list of all the possible types in media. So, and that's generated by the schema. Like we literally look at the media union, we get all the types out of it, and then we generate a union from that. So it's trivial and it's always in sync. I don't mind whether the matches directive like strictly requires that or doesn't. It might be that it, like you've got the foo here, allows potential future types. So you can say, oh, when we add, and this is more relevant for interfaces than it is for unions, but like I know that in the future, we're going to add a book type. Sorry, book's already in there. We're going to add a podcast type. So when we do that, it's still going to be able to select the title and the ID, and that's all I need. So I'm happy with that being included. So it would allow you to like do future things, just like you could potentially with the string as well, if you didn't write rules to prevent it.
Right. Um, Going one step further, it kind of really just feels like we want to just use this or this thing directly and have this be either a derived type, or if you could just kind of do that like directly somehow. Um,
Yeah, so
because again,
like
like
in Postgres, and I don't use this, so I might be wrong on it, you can do something like percent row type, and it gives you like the representation of a table, but as a type. So it'd be like, yeah, percent media or something, some character that means the names of these rather than the enum that is the names of these types rather than the type itself, um, for example. Uh, but again, that's another weird syntax thing that we could do. For now, just allowing a simple enum, I think would be sufficient. And generally in GraphQL, we push for the simplest solution. Like we only try and add new syntax if the juice is worth the squeeze, you know.
yeah, so the matching directive would get us the server validation on the inputs and on, I'm hoping, the output as well. Again, we'll get into that if we have time about what that implies. Um, but it keeps this issue. I mean, maybe this is something that we could just kind of kick off to something like, GraphQL code gen like should just handle this, right? I mean, I like what you're saying about this should just be like a compile step, and maybe we can get away with that. Maybe that's like enough to
We
not
don't
warrant.
generally care about this. Sorry, from the spec perspective, we don't care about that kind of thing.
Sure.
Like when we've got interfaces, for example, we make you copy out all the fields because that's what we want. We want it to be readable. We want you to see what the list of possibilities are. When you have a type that implements an interface and that interface implements another interface, your type also has to implement that other interface. GraphQL is not written around the concept of don't repeat yourself. It is explicit.
Yeah.
That is not an aim of the GraphQL spec. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that we should be overly repetitive, but in this case,
Right.
leaving this as a problem to the user that they could trivially solve with code generation, if they
Yeah.
want to, is, in my opinion, absolutely fine.
Um, okay, I could just kind of like thinking ahead, type, media type. I could like imagine something like this as a signal to codegen, and then this matches thing, like what we would encode in the RFC is that, as you say, when we reach this node, we would go and check that like this enum is valid, that every type in here every string, every identifier in here corresponds to a type on uh yeah, okay, there's a missing bit here. Like it needs to know what type, like it needs to know to look at media, and it can't necessarily just rely on this because it might be a connection object. So there's like maybe a missing input to the validation step to know what to validate against. Maybe that's an argument. Like matches type, you know, media, something like that. Because otherwise, how does, we're saying that like matches will validate that these things all exist in here and no more, no less. But like, how does it know what
That's the
what
same
the type
with string,
inferring
though, right?
is?
That would be the same issue with string. If it knows what it is for
Uh,
string, then it should know what it is for enum.
well, with string, that's a good point. Well, okay, so with, yeah, so there needs to be a
So
like a
just
runtime.
FYI, I put in the chat an alternative syntax. I think I would put it on the enum rather than on the union, and declare it as the possible types. And then if you're using code generation, you wouldn't even need the definition of those enum values. You just say enum media types is the possible types of media, and the system will just generate the rest of it for you. You are muted.
Sorry. So you would like just write that. Well, I don't know which one would be
Yeah,
without
so
STL.
for me, yeah, without the curly braces, exactly.
Yeah.
So for me, this would be input to your code generation, and then the output, that directive wouldn't be there in the output. You just would have the enum media types with its values, and that would be fine. I don't think
Yeah.
you explicitly need to link them together. I really don't think that's necessary. Just like
Yeah.
for string, it's not linked. And then when you apply the matches directive, the requirement is that the enum represents reasonable types from that media type or something like that, maybe. It could
And
be,
so then,
if it were the exact list of types, then that's fine for sure. Then we need to decide, is it okay for it to be a subset? Is it okay for it to be a superset? Is it okay for it to be, just some things that are in it, some things that aren't, what are the restrictions on that? If there even are any, I think it would need to be a superset because you want it to work with any potential selection inside of that selection set, right? So it must have at least all of the possible types in that type, but it could also describe some potential future ones that you might add, and that's okay too.
yeah, as I'm saying this, I'm remembering back to a few days ago when I wrote this. I think the way that we know, the way that the validation step, like pastime of the schema, knows that this is valid. And again, why maybe this isn't even necessary, but I guess would be for cogen, is that by default with no arguments, we're saying that like this thing is going to match this thing, like the direct output of this field. However, and that's where like the path thing comes in. So if this was a connection object, then you would follow that path argument. But either way, like you would still have the full information as to, yeah. So okay, I'm remembering what I had written myself a few days ago now. Okay. So I think this all makes sense. I like this. I guess my other question now is this possibly types thing just a like signal to cogen, or is this something like part of the spec itself? It's feeling like this is like a cogen signal, and then the cogen would like wipe this away, and you would end up with just like a regular old enum, and you would still do the validation step of like everything in here, like this is a subset of this.
Yeah, media types needs to be a superset of media, of the types in
Uh,
media.
Superset or
It
subset?
doesn't it
Because it
doesn't
would,
need to be a strict superset, but it must be a superset because it needs to be able to represent anything that you could do in the selection set, right? If you do ... on opera, then opera has to be in the media types union.
yeah, but like you couldn't do this. Like this wouldn't make any sense.
That would be fine.
Why?
Change that to
How?
podcast.
Say again. Sorry.
So change
Podcast.
bar to podcast. Keep in mind, we're
Okay.
talking about abstract types here. We're not necessarily talking strictly about unions. This example here is a union, but it could be an interface. So if it were an interface that was media, it's going to have some shared properties. And you might say, I'm okay, like, give me these things on book, movie, opera, which exist and exist right now and we're using. But also, like, I know at some point in the near future, we're adding a podcast feature. So let's be able to tease about podcasts ahead of time. So I'll also accept a podcast when it comes through, even though that type doesn't exist yet, because I know it's got these shared properties that I'll be able to use.
So at the time that we're writing this, we're saying podcast like does not exist as a type in the schema. Like this thing does
Doesn't
not
exist yet.
exist yet. Like does not exist. So
Mhm.
what does it mean for me to pass podcast here? Like I can't do a selection on podcast, right? Because this is
But
not like
but you can do
this.
it on media. So I want to kind of stress here that this is interesting. Okay, so a user can, under this proposal, because it is an argument, manually query that argument, right? If they don't know anything about the matches directive, we're not forbidding them from manually writing out that argument, just like you have done here.
It would
So,
be a validation failure, validation step failure at runtime in the server.
okay,
Because
so you,
well, no, it wouldn't
does it
because
need
you've
to
added
be?
podcast. Well, if you added this, right? I think like we're saying that this would be, or in my original proposal, like I mean, this would be just like a strict pass failure because this isn't part of the enum. But going back to the strings proposal, the extra validation step I was saying is that like this wouldn't exist in the thing that you pass to matches because like matches then goes and validates whatever. Sorry, gone.
Okay, so let's update this to be, so change line 33 to be on media, and then just put like
Okay,
title or something in there, right? Because media is going to be an
okay,
interface. So now you're
right.
saying, give me, if it's a book, give me its author. If it's a movie, give me its director. If it's any other type of media that I explicitly am going to say that I support, then give me the title. And podcast isn't in the schema right now. We don't have that right now, but we are expecting it and we know that it's going to behave similarly to everything else. So we want to specifically allow this for an older version of the app that has been released in advance of the schema being updated with this, new podcast push that our software is doing. And I think it's reasonable for a user to write this query and for app matches to not do anything special. So in my opinion, and I've not thought about this too deeply yet. I think what we actually want here is a way for the client to say, only give me the types that I'm asking for, rather than the schema to say, when you query this selection set, the types that you are requesting will automatically be pushed into this list, because that is a concrete change in behavior over what GraphQL does currently. And because it's a concrete change in behavior, it means we wouldn't be able to upgrade any existing fields to do this, right? We wouldn't be able to add a new argument with an app matches because it would now mean that all those previous fields that used to return those empty objects or the nulls or whatever was there before suddenly would not do that anymore. And that would be a breaking change. So we would be requiring that this is only on new fields. So I think this
Yeah.
needs to be a client opt-in, and you can use a server-side hint to say, hey, this argument is equivalent to this, but when the user queries this field, they need to opt in and say, get media at only or at only selected types or at only the fragment, the types that I request or whatever. And then it would go, oh, I'll use the matches argument to tie this together.
So I'm not sure I fully understand. Are you saying you want it to be like a directive on the query?
Yeah, so if you take this query 27 to 37 and just duplicate it. So this is a manually written query where you can do this currently with GraphQL, right? That already works.
Yep.
Yeah. And now we want to do it in the future such that we don't need to list this at supports anymore, right? So let's get rid of those arguments. And instead, I'm just going to call it at only for now. It's a terrible directive name and we'll come up with something better. But now we just say at only or at filter types or
Right.
what's the directive? Maybe just at matches would work. It's no, because it would need to be a different name.
Well,
Match
match is
types?
the relay. Match
At match
match is what
types.
relay.
Okay.
Okay. Match types. Sure.
Just do at match. At match is fine if that's what.
Well, at match is what
They do
relay
it on the
does, but
argument though,
it's
right?
yeah. And also, I don't know if this is the concern for us or not, but I thought it might be slightly easier to roll out if it didn't conflict with what they already had.
Yeah.
I guess
Use at match types.
match types. Okay, so at match
So
types.
now we are saying, as the client, we are saying, hey, I specifically want you to look at this selection set and I want you to look at the types that I'm selecting on it. And I want you to then honor the equivalent at matches directive that exists in the schema and like effectively insert these arguments for me. Now, to my mind, this is kind of GraphQL as a compile target, and actually this is a transform that the client should be doing, much like Relay is doing currently. And it's more of a description of a pattern that already exists and a like standardization of it so that all clients can do this. And if you don't want to use GraphQL as a compile target, that's fine. You just do what's on line 30 instead. Like you just have to
Um,
repeat yourself.
this going in the like if the upstream GraphQL spec sort of feels like it's then splitting off. Like there are two ways you can use GraphQL. I mean, I guess there already were, but like kind of really sort of enforcing this in the spec, which is like this. You can really only use the spec if you're using a client that has a compilation step. I'm also could be. I mean, I'm interested like how this
Right.
impacts
So you could
overcaching problems.
we could add this to the spec itself and then have it automatically work. For a client like Relay or Apollo or Urkel that has a normalized cache, they would need to tie the fact that it has match types
Right.
into the cache key. And they would need to know what those types are in the selection set. And also, you would need to do some interesting problems here. So, for example, book and movie are concrete types, but media is an abstract type itself. So now the signature of that, is it book, movie, and media, or is it book and movie and all of the possible media types, which it can't be. It has to be book, media, movie, and media, because a client like Apollo doesn't actually know what your schema is unless you tell it. So by
Right.
default, it doesn't know. So it doesn't know that book, movie, or media are concrete or abstract types. It just knows that they must be one of those. It must be an
Yeah.
object type or an interface or a union. Otherwise, I couldn't do a selection set on it. But other than that, I don't know what it is, which makes signing the normalized thing much more challenging. Whereas on line 30, all we'd need to do to make a normalized store key for that is we know it's the get media field and we know it's been given these arguments in this order, and we just do a signature of that and we hash it if we want to save space, and that's it, done. Now we have a key and we can use that no matter what the selection set is. So seeing it as a compile target means that there's no complexity with regard to normalized caching. And what we're doing is essentially saying, if you use a smart client that can do some compilation step for you, which includes Relay, but also Apollo,
Well, Apollo doesn't have
probably
a
Urkel.
compiler.
It doesn't have a
Apollo doesn't have
compiler, but it does have
a
query
runtime thing.
transforms.
It can transform the query at runtime. I see what you're saying. And so you're saying that like at runtime, it would then transform it into line 30 or something that looks like
Yes,
line 30.
which is interesting because if that is what we're going to push for, then actually the argument there, the enum, wouldn't even just be the object types. It would also have to include all of the abstract types that it could be, because those could also be expressed by the selection set, right?
So we'd only want to kind of pass in these exact things. Like let's assume we're not relay, we're like a dumb client. Maybe we're doing a query, like we're transforming to this at runtime. I guess it's going to be strings. Or are you saying like you want to keep the like you want to keep the enum as well in this proposal?
I think I've managed to come up with some problems. I'm not sure I've necessarily come up with some solutions. So I'm not 100% sure on that right
All
now.
right, let's just go with strings for now. We'll kind of maybe this will be an enum. I don't know. So saying like at runtime, and it's getting harder and harder for me to see like how in the GraphQL server spec we sort of say what a runtime transform should do, but let's just go with this. I guess it's so again like Apollo doesn't know if this is a union or a list of unions or a list of interfaces. Like this could be another concrete type, or it could be the interface itself. So
Yeah,
it would just like have to do this, but it doesn't know
yeah.
anything else. That's kind of weird, but okay.
Yeah, and I think that that's a problem for what it is that I was proposing just now, right? And keep in mind, I'm thinking about this on the fly, so
Sure.
I can make mistakes. Um, but yeah, Apollo with its runtime, no knowledge of the schema, cannot know that that's a concrete object type or that it's an abstract type. So it would just have to include it in the argument, and that's going to cause issues because you can do a selection set. I think this is true. You can do a selection set on any type, like an inline fragment on any type that any possible type that that selection set can represent. So you could take like a book and then do a selection set on it for its interface, and then you could do a selection set on the interface for one of its types, and then you could do a selection set on that for I think a union. I'm not 100% sure, but for like because it's a member of a union, maybe that one I'd have to check. I'm not sure how unions
Could,
tie in.
could you just like keep nesting like
You
this,
can do
right?
that, yeah.
Um, yeah, like handling making this supported in this world as well, and like nested fragments is going to be
Yeah,
interesting,
you've then also got the issue as well of what happens if in the root selection set you add ID and you add title
right?
without a filter, like because those are technically true on every possible type, right? So by requesting them, you are saying
But
anything, any type of media that this returns, I want I want to know its ID and title because I can make use of them. And then if it's a book, also tell me its author. If it's a movie, also tell me its director. And in this case, you wouldn't actually want the supports thing because you've said, here is my fallback, here is my always. Um, and yeah, there's things like type name that got auto added and ID, which is needed for normalized caching, right? Um,
right.
so this is again why I'm saying that I feel quite strongly that this is a client opt-in, not a schema dictate. Um,
The schema thing is just there to provide the extra kind of like input validation and output validation because again, like whatever transforms we're assuming and hoping and pleading that like a transform would do at runtime, ultimately over the wire, we still have to kind of treat some arbitrary curl script, whatever. And so having that runtime validation on the server would be, I mean, if we're going to write a spec anyway, it might be nice to have. I'm also confused about what happens in the case that I should know this off the top of my head, but in the case that this is a union of types versus an interface, like this is okay if it's returning an interface.
but not
What
if it's a union.
yeah is on every interface, but even though title might be on every thing in the union, you wouldn't be able to write that still.
That's
Um,
correct, because you might add a type to the union in future that doesn't have that field and it would break previous queries.
yeah, and so if it was returning a list of types, sorry, if it was returning a list of unions, then it would. I don't know what part that's here.
The
Okay,
type name would still be allowed to be requested in a union. It always is, but it's the
because that's a
only,
meta field. Okay, that's
yeah,
the only one.
but it's
Got it.
the only
Okay,
one that can be.
got it. Okay, that yeah makes sense.
So again, because this is something that you need to opt in with the client and that also has these weird like edge cases, like, well, I mean, it's not even an edge case, but it's like ID and title is pretty basic. Like it's quite likely that a client transform might add this to the selection set automatically, it feels like the client should definitely opt into this. And one way to opt into this is to explicitly pass a list of supports like we do on line 54 and have the user write that out manually. I only want these types, right? I want you to query all the media, but I only want to filter it to these ones. And this is just like a standard that we're saying that can exist for a condition aware clause. You know, filter it down to only these types first, and then give me the first five. Alternatively, an alternative syntax like the one that you hinted that Lee gave or is thinking about might be sensible because that can sidestep this issue. Because suddenly, if you use an alternative syntax, you don't allow these problematic cases to even be expressed.
I'm really trying to. I need to go on a spiritual journey to remember what Lee had said. But I do that
I
now.
don't know what it is, so I'm just going to come up with something daft to tide us over. But again, let's use a percent symbol. If you put a percent just before your curly brace on line 71,
A percent symbol before my curly brace on line 71. Okay,
yeah, get rid of all the parenthesis. We don't need the supports argument in this.
got it.
So we're now saying this is a special selection set, and then the root level for this might well accept type name. In fact, let's say it accepts type name, and then the remaining keys on this special percent selection set, which is not a normal selection set, it's a special one, would be the type names. So now, if you just get rid of the dot 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 on in front of each of your other examples, it would just be that. And you can get rid of the
So
ID and title because they're not expressible.
right, so it would be rather than like fields on this special selection set, it would be types on this special selection set, specifically types that belong to the union or possible interfaced types.
Yes.
Um,
And it might not be that we use curly braces or we might not use a percent sign. Like we just have some syntax that says this is a new syntax that specifically does not exist in the world currently. So we're not breaking anything. You are opting in as the client by using this syntax to mean this new thing. And then, we go for it.
and then the ordering. So something else that was indicated is that you want to have a signal to know if ordering matters or not, because I think Relay does this in some cases, or Facebook does this in some cases, where they use this ordering to say prefer returning book and movies, or prefer returning books.
So I
And
strongly suspect that what Lee has done here, sorry, I cut you off there. I was expecting you to say a particular thing, but you might not be saying that thing. So finish your thought.
well, it's that's maybe like the minor use case, or what you want to have happen where you want ordering to matter. Um, but that presents a problem because in a theoretical caching strategy for this thing, you might look at the ordering of that and say, well, those are different cache keys, and therefore there would be a cache miss. And so you would want to kind of dictate if like this is going to be treated as basically a set or an ordered list. And you might have valid use cases for either. And that's in my original proposal. I think I have like the sort parameter, the sort argument in the matches directive to indicate which you want. Like, do you prefer like less cache hits but preserve ordering, or do you want to kind of like force that the ordering is always the same and normalized, and you're gonna get as many cache hits
Mhm.
as
I
um,
would say that you're trying to solve too many problems, and that ordering is far less of a universal problem than this problem of needing to only select the types that you support. And I would
I
say
agree.
if you have that problem and you want to say that I want you to prioritize book, movie, media, then you just add that as an argument like you would normally.
Yeah, so like that basically. So we can just, I'm happy with having this be out of scope of this
Mhm.
RFC, or like a extension in the future, whatever. Okay, so let's, okay, I'm
So
okay with
to
that. That makes
answer
sense.
the question that I thought you were asking, but you weren't,
Sorry.
is, so note here that we've got book, movie, and media. Book and movie are concrete types. Media is an abstract type. So this object, to my mind, would actually resolve both, right? So it would resolve, let's say it was a book, it would resolve book, author, and media title.
So this would become
Like in JSON.
this book author. So like this would get like transformed to book author. What are we saying? Something like that. I don't know. That doesn't make sense. I think I see what you're saying. Like this would
If you think of
resolve
it in
to.
terms of what the JSON object is that you would get back, I'm saying the JSON object you would get back for a book would be, yeah, get media would be, I guess, a list, and then the entry in it would be a type name, book, book, curly braces, author, with whoever's in there. Yeah, and then media as well, along with whatever the media selection set was.
So and the selection set would be combined there. So you would have something like author. You still have an author.
I don't think it would be combined. No, it would just be the selection set on that. To my mind, right now, it would resolve as if it were a selection set, as if this percent curly braces is just a regular selection set on a special dynamically created type where book returns the same object, but only if it's a book. Movie returns the same object, but only if it's a movie, and media returns the same object, like the input object gets returned as the output, but only if it's media.
Sorry, so are you saying we would like actually return media here, or would it only be
Yes.
concrete types? You would return media, not concrete
Yes.
types. You would happily return the interface.
Yeah. So line 86 shouldn't be there. It should be movie null, but I personally I would just omit it entirely.
This is so like we're saying we can return 3 books. Like this is potentially allowed here. So like all
Oh,
allowed
you are
values.
missing some curly brackets then.
Yes, I beg your pardon. So I am. Um, wait. Oh, because this is a.
So what I'm saying is that curly
This is
bracket that you
interesting.
open on line 85 would have three
Uh,
fields. Okay, it would have type name, it would have book,
right.
and it would have media.
Type name. It would have. Hang on. So this is like one item in the array of return types.
Yeah,
So we're going to get type name is book, and then we're going to return the book.
yeah.
So that's good. That's okay for returning a book.
And also media, because book is a media.
Okay, and so we'd return title. I
Exactly.
see.
So it's just like a regular selection set.
Got it, got it, got it, got it, got it. Because this is, you would just like merge these two things then in the client, like title, because can go on. Okay,
Yeah, arguably
got
we
it.
could do this so that we actually do some magic combination thing where it boils down to just returning book, author, and title. And that might be the right decision, but it introduces a huge number of issues with like, what if you spread selection sets in there? And what if you use aliases and all sorts of other stuff? And also it
You
both
could do this, right?
simplifies it, but yeah, but doing this both simplifies and complicates the problem. Like if you look at that selection set and you ignore the fact that there's a percent sign on line 71, what we described before is what that selection set would resolve to, right? If
Mm,
there was this magic type. And that's what I'm essentially saying. The percent suddenly means, oh, there's this magic intermediary type that, isn't one that's represented in the schema, but it means there's a field for each of the possible types, and there's a field for type name, and you can query them. And then if it matches, it will resolve to those things.
okay,
They're both
I
options. And like you want to evaluate both of them, I expect, but this is like the default one that's in my brain.
got it. I think, yeah, I really appreciate that you running through that with me. I think I get this. I think I fully understand this now. So then my question is, this is going to be way more, well, I say way more difficult to implement, but I do feel like the string parsing and all the edge cases and stuff in the original proposal will be like really difficult. But this would be like more complicated, let's say, to implement and to roll out, because this would be just like a new bit of syntax entirely. So like how big of a problem is this to warrant such a big change in the language itself? Or like
Okay, so
new syntax elements.
you've got three options, right? Option one is do not change the spec. Option one is the do nothing option, where you lay out that there's this special property that you can add, like Relay already do. So effectively, it's follow the Relay path, right? If you add this directive to your query, then your AST should be transformed before you send it to the server, and it should insert the list of types that you care about into this parameter. And if you are Relay, this is already done. Great. If you're Apollo, you have a little bit more of an issue because you don't know what the schema is. So now we have to have the server side handle the fact that you might be passing abstract types in this argument as well. But that's okay. Like you just say that's part of this standard. So that's option one. Option two is you do what we just described with the syntax, right? You concretely change the syntax, which is fairly ergonomic for users. It also cannot possibly break existing things because it's not a syntax that already existed, which means that any client that wants to support it, assuming that the client passes the queries, would need to have support for this for you to be able to use it, which also means that because they're adding support for it, they would also add support in the normalized store. So they would know to look at the list of keys that you're requesting on that selection set and to take that as part of the normalized signature for the field. So option two is this one, which I think is relatively minimal. It requires a new syntax. It will require a way of passing this information to the resolver, and that would be a thing that doesn't currently exist. And it might be that we add, for example, a dunder argument name, right? And we just say like, here's this meta field. If they've used this syntax, then you will also be provided this meta field as an argument. It might be that we do it a different way. Like, I don't really care, but I think a dunder field of like only types that returns this would be fine. And I think we would also have the implementation filter for you. So even if your resolver doesn't honor this, we, as the implementation, as GraphQL.js, for example, would look at the results. We know what that argument was. We know what types are accepted. We know what interfaces and abstract types there are. So we will just like filter out and return only the ones that are allowed, or we'll throw a validation error or whatever it is that we choose to do. We can handle it. And then option three is the one that you are proposing, which essentially is, I say it's what you're proposing. It's what we've discussed a bit, I think, as a little bit of give and take. I'm not sure exactly whether it's what you originally proposed. But essentially, you've got two parts. You've got a schema directive, so a metadata directive that needs to be represented in introspection that can indicate that this particular argument represents the list of possible types in this position or in these positions, as you would need for like a connection for like edges and then node, and also for nodes, combined with a client-side directive where the client says, I want you to enforce this for me. I want you to do this work for me. I want you to look at this selection set, take the types that I have in it, and instead put them into your special argument that you have for this.
Yeah, my RFC didn't really talk about this. It's assuming that I guess like maybe Apollo could do that as a query transform, but that would be up to Apollo and client. But at the minimum, a human could write it out. But I think I see what you're saying. Is this okay? Yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
No, that was basically the end.
Okay. Yeah. Um,
And option one is the do nothing in the spec, right? Option one is already there, right? We are already doing it. Like I, in my schemas, already have an only argument where I can filter things to it. Relay are already doing a thing where they happen to have a client-side transform, but from the GraphQL specs point of view, the client is sending a request that already filters to these things. Like it hasn't needed to change. So
I guess I will kind of the even dumber option of like option zero is like by hand or by cogen, duplicate the enum or strings by hand. And then like option one would be that, but with like an extra compile step or query transform step at runtime.
that, I mean, if it's client side, the spec doesn't care. It's the same from the spec's point of view.
Sure, okay. Fair enough.
Now, I have been arguing at GraphQL Conf that we should have a client spec, and this would be one of those things that would go into a client spec, but it's not something that the GraphQL spec would require, I
Yeah.
don't think.
Okay, so from the spec perspective, it's still like do nothing, but like that option breaks down into two possible. I think for my benefit, I'm gonna label this as option zero and option one.
Okay, so
Um,
option one to you is effectively build a new version of like the GraphQL cursor connection spec or the GraphQL object identification spec. It's not a
right.
thing that needs to be in the spec itself. It's a new spec that encompasses this common practice that people are doing. And like, yes, I would 100% support that being an approach.
Yeah. Okay. That fully makes sense. Um, I think option one is kind of like where I started, and then I guess you could even write your own uh server validation uh plugins or something to GraphQL.js, right? You can provide your own
Yep.
validation rules to go along with that. So that's in the bank. We got that one as an option. The question is that enough? Like, are we all satisfied with that, or is it worth going for
Option
option
one is essentially
two?
already done, right? Option
Yeah,
one's essentially already done. You just like it would be
well,
great to take this thing that Relay does and bring it to the wider community. And that also means making it like more flexible as well, right?
it's done, but not actually. It's done. Like Relay has it, but Apollo users do not have it. There is no like central kind of authoritative userland spec for that. So
Exactly. So we need a
like
standard spec for it, but it's not part of the GraphQL spec. It's very much client centric. But here's a new pattern that we've seen that is useful in the community, and we're going to standardize it. And now all the clients can implement it. And
so
hooray!
other languages have. I want to get onto option two in just a second, but like just to kind of go on option one, if we kind of go down option one path, I guess like if I wrote this up, it would be heavily inspired, I guess, by what Relay does, and then I put it on like mark.dev.com or maybe like Yelp thing or something like that. But other language ecosystems have the concept of like community plugins. So like GraphQL Code Generator has the like community plugins. ViewPress has the same thing. Um, I don't know, maybe that's what Ozar does. But if this userland spec did get published, what do you think about the idea of like a you know like a list of like community userland specs where they're maintained by the community, but they have kind of like some sort of like vague blessing of like this is a centralized thing, like on the like in the GraphQL repo org.
If this is something that you wrote, and there are complexities in terms of intellectual property ownership, which you and I can talk about offline. But if this is something that you wrote that effectively Apollo and Relay and Urkel and anyone else who was interested decided to adopt, um, I would support it becoming a foundation project. Um, I personally would be happy to see the what people tend to refer to as the relay specs becoming part of the foundation as well. So rather than it being a community spec, I think it would be just another GraphQL, not a GraphQL spec for the whole technology, but like a set of
Mm,
specs.
Maybe we're getting into like legalese here, and I'm not going to talk about that. But my suggestion here was that it is specifically still like community stuff, but it lives under there's like, github.com/GraphQL/community specs or something like that, and then it kind of goes into that repo where it's still a
Okay,
community
yeah,
spec, but
I
not
would support that. That is like we effectively have that kind of thing already with the Scalars project,
right.
where
Yeah,
people
that's
can
what I was thinking
submit
as well.
scalars. So there is precedent for it. And since there's already precedent for it, like, yeah, why not? Um,
Okay.
it would need someone to champion it. So,
Yeah,
do it alongside.
I think I think like at a minimum, I would want to do that. Um, so that gives me good direction. And then like, yeah, option two, I guess I can rework the RFC. Um, do we think it's worth going for option two
Well,
and making
first of
this
all,
like
you need
a
to find a syntax that everyone's happy with that is obviously means what it should mean. And I think what Lee was saying was a match syntax. Um, so I don't know exactly what that would involve or what he had in mind there. I don't think it could just be like at match and then a selection set because that that's just an at match directive. Like that selection set isn't special. Um,
I, I, vague, I vaguely remember there being like two like something like this. I don't know. And then I don't know. And then like a separate like selection set or something like that. There'd be like two selection sets. I can't remember exactly.
maybe I couldn't tell you. Um,
Okay.
I think using a symbol to explicitly break the existing syntax would work. Um, because technically you would be able to do this on the depending on what syntax you chose, you might be able to do this on the root operation type as well, or on a fragment selection set. And you wouldn't want like just a selection set following another selection set, because that could then just be an anonymous operation, or it could be a typo, it could be a missing curly brace. So I think it would need to be something. And I'm definitely not saying that percent is the correct character for that. Yeah, it could be triangular brackets match. It could be that you literally use triangular brackets for that type-based selection set rather than curly brackets. Um, like this, I was thinking square brackets, but then I was like, that's lists. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it could be literally this kind of thing. It could be that you yeah, I don't know. There's lots of options. So finding the right one and discussing it with people and seeing what they think would be, I think, a good direction.
The the only like value I see of it being something like this is that I can't really think of like what other future special types of selection sets we might want to have in the future where you are encoding meaning in that selection set. Like we're saying that like this syntax gives specific meaning at like application logic meaning, right? But if there were, we'd run out of characters if we had like a different thing per different type of selection sets. And so
So I
having
think,
something like this,
yeah.
like type equals match, something like this, like a Rust, what am I
Oh
thinking
wow,
of?
yeah.
Like the Rust compiler, whatever, directive. It's like something like that, right? And you could like give it other things here. Although I guess that just looks like a directive. But anyway, I guess like
But
syntactically different. I don't
importantly,
know,
it would
just
need to not be a directive because the directive in this case would completely change the meaning of the selection set, right? That selection set would no longer be a selection set on media. It would be a selection set on this like meta type that represents all the types that media could be. So
okay.
it definitely can't be a directive to my mind. And using a different symbol like you've done here, even if it is even if it looks exactly like a directive, except instead of the at, it uses a different character, like that seems reasonable. There's other options as well. Like you could do double curly braces. and just put
Ooh,
the
it's
just put
yeah,
the selection inside of that. And
that's
now
kind of nice.
it's like a meta selection. There's all sorts of different things. Or you could do curly braces and then a less than, like so it's or a different combination of bracket characters. Um,
Okay, but something like this. And then I'm just trying to think, like anticipating some feedback, like in the future, if we wanted to encode like special meaning in special selection sets in the future. I'm really trying to struggle to come up with an example here. Uh, but like
there are other symbols. Like we can
some
always add other symbols. Ideally,
something.
ideally you want to look at what the existing uh, patterns are that are out there in the ecosystem. Like what are other people doing? What is the standard? Like this is a match syntax, right? Interestingly, this I think Lee also said many of or something like that, because like we've just got the one of directive in, right? One of says exactly one of these things will be set. Um, Obviously, it's for input, but we could apply it to output as well. But in this case, we're not saying one of these will be set. We're saying some of these will be set, right? Like book and media can both be set at the same time. So we need effectively like a many of or a match or a case switch statement style syntax. So is there a syntax like that is used in a query language that isn't, literally switch brackets, and case statements?
Uh, yeah.
Like maybe have a look at Cypher, maybe have a look at SQL, have a look at I don't know, any other weird query language that might have a syntax for this rather than it being a full construct like you would have in, say, JavaScript or C.
All right. Go to what
JQ,
Fortran does.
what does JQ use? There's lots of interesting little toy query languages that might have already solved a problem like this, whose syntax we could maybe borrow. Or we could just do it with double curly brackets or with a percent symbol. I quite like the percent symbol, to be honest. Like it feels.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking of like the idea of having like special selection sets. We've come up with a use case for having a special type of selection set. And I'd be worried about stomping on that because we'd run out of characters. Like, let's say in the future we wanted like a different type of special selection set where maybe we want to kind of, I don't know, I'm just making something up here, query something that doesn't exist in the schema and comes from somewhere else. I don't know, like some Bitcoin or LLMs. I like completely making something up, right? So let's say the use case is in the future, everyone agrees it's a good idea to call fields that don't exist in the schema. I don't know. So our field is called LLM output. We want it to be like a new special kind of selection set where different rules apply in this selection set. And so being able to kind of do something like, um, you know, uh, the future thing too, right? And then
Yep.
in our current special kind of selection set, it would be match, what did we say, match many or like match types, right? I don't know if that's something that if that's like overly verbose for now. I don't know how we balance Yagni versus GraphQL is a project that will span many decades. So I don't know kind of how you feel about that.
I would say that what you've effectively done is you've created like a directive, not a directive, that accepts an argument, and that argument says, what is the mode of this? Mode equals future thing two, mode equals match types. And then if you just put the percent there, you've given that argument a default.
If you do a percentage sign,
So on line 71, if you just put that, just the percent sign without the square brackets,
right?
so that's the same thing, right? It's got a default mode and its default mode is match. But that doesn't stop us
Okay.
from adding future thing in square brackets in future. Like that would just
Yeah.
change the mode from match mode to future mode. Like it doesn't, I don't think it prevents.
Okay.
You're right to consider, because one of the guiding principles is preserve option value. So you are
Right.
right to consider that, but I don't think it prevents this. Like it actually gives us space to have that kind of thing. All it requires is that what we would follow that percent with if we were to do something else cannot be a curly brace. And that's fine. We
Okay.
could do square brackets like you've got here. We could do rounded brackets. We could do another percent sign. There's lots of options.
Yeah, it'd be kind of, I guess, in the future when we did have two things, weird for the default to just be this, but
The
maybe we're getting
default being the one that we've traditionally used, and
fair
that
enough.
in the first 10 years is the only example of a use case that we came up with for
Yeah.
an alternative thing. Doesn't seem that unreasonable.
Okay. Okay. I'm worrying too much here. Okay. Fine. Fair enough. Cool. I like it. In fact, I love it. I think this is really cool. This makes sense. I think there's still like a ton of questions around like, ordering and caching and all this other stuff, and we can figure that out later. But at a high level, I think this makes sense to me. So then I think, yeah, we laid out the options. We've got option one, two, and three. Option one, at a minimum, of do the. Sorry, I need to. I guess. Yeah, I will do. Um, yeah. So option one of like a userland proposal, write up a userland spec and publish that somewhere. Um, sounds good at a minimum, and then I guess I'll just come to the next working group meeting and kind of take the temperature of the room and see if people feel like it's worth doing the fancy thing of option two.
Yeah,
What
ideally,
do you think?
if we can extract from Lee what his syntax was that he was proposing before then, that would be great. I would, when you express option two, I would express that like A, the syntax is in flux, and B, the result shape is also in flux. Like it's, I think it's going to be one of those two things, right? It's either going to be like it was a selection set, or it's going to be like the selection sets get merged, and we don't know which, and we don't really necessarily care which. Like they both have advantages and disadvantages.
Okay.
So yeah, just be careful when you present it to say a lot of this is still in flux, but here is the problem that we're trying to solve, and we can solve it in user space, but it is really clunky, and that's resulted in people not doing it. And it also is problematic for clients that don't have a copy of the schema locally. For clients that
Yes.
don't know what the schema is, this becomes problematic. And so the solution to that also shifts a lot more work to the server side, which now has to also resolve abstract types at runtime, that kind of thing. And it would be
Yeah. Option one has to deal with this thing specifically.
exactly,
Um,
yeah, which
okay.
is undesirable. And this is a common issue, so common that Relay have this built-in way of solving it, but it would be ideal if we solved it in the spec. How about we do it with a custom syntax and it's straightforward?
So let me just ask you, like, do you think this is worth pursuing this option two new syntax proposal?
This is something like this would be my preferred
Something like
solution, I
this.
think. Yeah.
Okay. If okay, that's a really good signal then. Um, and given that all of our time is limited, I'm wondering like how much time I want to spend pursuing both options at the same time. Maybe I'll just kind of wait to get more signal at the next meeting, because if like the consensus is that like, yeah, let's just like do this properly, let's try and make option two work, then I guess I'll just kind of focus on that.
It's
Um,
probably going to take a reasonably large amount of time to
yeah,
get option two through the spec process. We move slowly deliberately, right? We don't want to cause too much churn. We want to make sure that everything that we add is valuable. And one of our governing directives is effectively prefer no change, like
yeah,
prefer not to add anything. And this is solvable, as we've seen in option one, without a change to the spec. So what
yeah.
we're essentially saying is, yeah, we can solve this without a change, but the solution there is really painful. It's so painful that even though this has been a known solution for a while, clients aren't implementing it, and our users are having issues. That said,
That's
if this is a problem that you are suffering currently at your work, then option one is the way to solve it, right? Solve it right now by using a convention and by using these arguments that like relay does, and then
Yeah.
improve it in the future with a
No, I mean,
syntax that
like,
makes it easier.
yeah, like we're unblocked immediately. It's just, yeah, do the thing you already kind of suggested at the top of this meeting. So we're immediately unblocked. I'm interested in kind of, avoiding the need to repeat that in a bunch of places and building for the future. And I like the idea of, I personally, selfishly like the idea of having something in the spec that forces vendors to implement rather than like pleading with vendors to pretty please implement this thing that would be useful to us and like maybe having to pay a support contract. But if it's in the spec, then it's like, well, you gotta implement it to be spec compliant. And if enough people feel that it's worthy enough to do that, and everyone would just implement it differently anyway, then it kind of is like a win-win. Well, almost a win-win. So yeah, I feel like that's a good stopping place.
It is a big lift, and it also interestingly ties into the um, service capabilities pull request that I've got open alongside the error handling. Because again, this is a syntactical feature. So this is something that the server could indicate that it supports or not. And then the client would be able to choose whether or not it supports this. And the important thing is, if the server doesn't support it, then option one is always a possibility, right? So if we were to add this, we could, if we wanted to, add it as an optional feature to GraphQL where you say, we indicate whether or not we support this. I mean, effectively, it is optional, right? Because you can just choose to only ever implement the September 2025 version of the GraphQL spec and never upgrade since then, if you really don't want to implement this. But if we can make it minimal for schema for GraphQL implementations to implement, and we can show that there's sufficient benefit, then I think it should be fine. And I mean, honestly, if it's like an extra character in the syntax, the big question here is, how are you going to express this to user space, right? How are you going to
Yeah.
express this to resolvers? How are you going to write that bit up in the spec? And I'm more interested in that than I am in the syntax.
I'm
Um,
also interested what this implies for connections.
yeah.
Am I still showing my screen?
Oh, that's
I think
actually a
I
really,
am.
really, really good point. Yeah,
Niche. Am I showing my screen or not?
you were, you've
Window.
stopped.
Okay. Here we go. So this is what we have at the moment, but this implies that your JSON return blob is going to be this exact
Yeah.
thing. Hmm. But what you want is to paginate this.
Yeah. Or ideally you want to do it
Uh,
with a connection. And that becomes
right.
interesting because then do you do that on the nodes? And if you do it on the nodes, how do you pass that information? Because really you want to pass that information to the root connection field, not to the nodes field or the edges field.
Right, because you could, okay, so what you're saying is you might do something like um nodes
Which would be your percent curly braces, right?
right here.
And
I
then
need to nest
anything
that,
else, page info and whatnot.
but it's the get media
It's the
resolver
get
that
media
needs.
that wants to receive that knowledge.
I,
And
I was
you,
thinking,
you also open a even more problematic thing, right? If you expand this and above line 150, you also add edges with curly braces and then put node in there. No, that's not polymorphic. That's not abstract. Edges is a concrete type. It's node itself that would have the percent.
um, so you're saying this? I need to refresh my memory. Okay,
Yeah, like
cursors
that.
connections back.
Delete the S from nodes. Yeah, so that would be the edges, and then just copy line 151 to 157 and add that in addition after line 158. and that one would be nodes, right?
Right.
And now delete line 154 and delete line 161. No, yeah, right. So now you've got for the same get media field, you've got two things where node is only requesting book and media, and nodes is requesting movie and media, which means there is no consistent argument that you can pass to get media. So yes, you're right to
This
recognize
is
that this is a problem.
so the idea of having, if I go back to this original RFC, the idea of having like different, like what happens in the selection set can get quite crazy. I think is a problem even in this RFC as well. And I kind of hesitated away from kind of like looking at what is the node that does the selection and trying to like assume anything, because that would get into all these horrible edge cases as we've just seen. Which I think is why we had something like, where was it? No, I think I left it as a comment actually. Hang on. Yeah, like this thing over here. Am I still showing my screen or not? Let me check. I'm probably not showing the Chrome tab. Let me change that real quick. New share, Chrome tab, RFC matches. Okay. So if you have this connection, um, that's why I suggested making it repeatable, because you could do something
Yes.
like this. And then having, like I've seen on some schemas, you do the connection spec, but then you also kind of like have an escape hatch and you have like an all field or something, which I think is like very similar to this problem that you just wrote up there. And so by applying the logic twice to each path, to each thing, that was kind of like my stab at this. But then I sort of walked it back and said, this is probably just like bad schema design. Like, when would there ever be a valid use case for this that we wouldn't frown upon?
Well, um, here I'm sending into chat is an example from the Star Wars API, right? Where you can literally I'll add a, it's more conventional for that second field to be called nodes rather than after the type. But it's perfectly valid to have the edges and also the nodes being the shortcut. So you can query this,
yeah,
right?
but
And you'll
that's
get,
Yeah, I think actually this is what I'm thinking of, not all. I think this is exactly what I'm thinking of them. So like you're
yeah.
saying as a client, you're saying like, I know there's only going to be like 3 items in this array. Don't bother paginating it. Just give me the things. Just give me the 3 things.
So these are both fields on inside of number two, right? They're both inside of all
Yeah.
fields. Yeah. So your any pagination arguments would be arguments to line two, and you can put whatever you want in there. The important thing is that you're querying two different like paths, and the selection sets on them are different. And you could also just do this with edges twice, but with different aliases, right? And if you're thinking about this from a fragment perspective, if you're querying a connection, it might be that one component queries nodes and one component queries the edges and the node through that. And they're two different independent components and they don't know about each other. So they might end up building essentially this query without you realizing. And now suddenly you can't tie these things together anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, this I'm just reminding myself of the spec here. And this comment jives with what I had in mind. And then this is, I think, the same like problem case. Yeah, basically. Where you have two different nested paths to
Yeah.
the, I guess I'm using animals here.
But it gets even more problematic if, because we're solving this in the general, right? We're not just solving this for connections, which would
Yes.
honestly, if we, so one option here, one option that we should consider supporting is just making connections an explicit part of the GraphQL spec. It's the
Yeah.
most common need for generics in GraphQL is just to make connections generic. If we made them first class, then those kind of problems would go away. If you want to support this in the broadest sense, in the generic, then discounted and full price could themselves accept arguments.
Yeah, like I would have said that we can't support every type of like weird application logic you might want to do. If you want to do something crazy like this, just do it yourself. Like we're only going to support connections basically as the use case for weird stuff like this. Which I feel like that would get us like 99.9% of what we want. So I'd be
Yeah,
okay
but
with
you
that.
still have the issue again with connections of querying edges versus querying the nodes directly. And those do and can happen at the same time in the same query because of fragment collocation and fragments not knowing about each other. So it is a
Right.
situation that can occur. And in that case, you need to decide what you're going to pass through to your root field. And I think it would probably be a I'm trying to get it right, a union of the types seen in both of the selection sets. So if this asks for cat and dog, and this asks for dog and fish, then you should send to the field cat, dog, and fish.
Well, maybe
Then you need to
because if
decide
you've
what actually comes out on the actual field set.
yeah, like I mean, does that imply you'd hit the resolvable once? I think that's kind of back to the problem in the original RFC, is that if you have two selection sets, like through differing fragments to the same resolver, then each call site, each place that declares that fragment wants, you know, like 5 items here and 5 items there. Uh,
So to my
but
mind,
if
the most reliable way to fix this is to make it a client prerogative, is to standardize a argument name, only, match, whatever, um,
Mhm.
and have the user write it out. And by all means, when I say the user write it out, I mean have the client write it out. I don't care whether it's the user themselves or whether it's auto-generated, whether it's a compiler target, whether it's a query transform. But essentially, from GraphQL's perspective, it's come through as an argument on the field. And then your client, when it opts into this behavior, should probably do it as a directive on the field itself, where it should say populate this argument using the selection set at this path, using the types used in the selection set at this path, and that's it. Because then we don't have the edges and nodes problem, because you, as the client, have said, find the ones that are at edges and find the types there and just do that.
All right, so are we back to option three,
Option one.
basically?
Uh,
Uh, oh, so we're back to a user land spec proposal then, whereby
it's all done on the client, essentially.
okay, are you switching teams now? Are you saying you're now kind of team? Let's just do option one because option three has this. Well, I mean, option two has this like problem that we just found.
I would love to have option two if we can solve it well for connections, but I can't right now figure out how to solve it well for connections. And as such, I don't see it as viable right now.
Yeah,
If you can solve it well for connections, and it all comes down to how do you take this nested selection set with these parameters and how do you then feed that back up to the parent or grandparent field that is the
yeah,
owner of it. Um, that's the issue, right? What does that mean in terms of the spec? What does that mean in terms of like when we're writing the merge selection sets algorithms? Because this is in the spec as it currently stands, right? You do not evaluate the selection set on a field until you've resolved the field. It's part of complete field, right? And so we could do a thing there where we say oh, if the selection set of the field is, one of these special percent selection sets, then do an extra thing. But we're not going to know that a child, like a grandchild selection set, has that special property because we're not going to read that far. We don't look ahead like that. So how would you write that up in terms of the spec? And that's going to complicate every implementation of GraphQL. But if you instead say that this is all handled on the client, then GraphQL just works the same way that it always has. And then you just need a way to make it easy for the client to say, looking at this thing as big abstract tree, how do I populate this argument? And that's just a convention. That's just, yeah. So yeah, I can't think of a good way to make it work for connections.
All right. I will do some thinking on that in the background, but I'm also still kind of, I was like vaguely thinking of something like a React context type thing where you assume like the closest parent that does a thing. I don't know, but I think what you just said about not evaluating the special selection sets until you actually reach it makes it difficult or impossible to do that. So going back to like
Have a
a,
read through the execute selection set part of the
okay,
spec and just like see how that chains together and
yeah.
see if you can find a way to map your way through it.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Going back to option one, which is now kind of suddenly feeling like the most likely to happen option. Um, so it's basically the RFC as written, except it would just kind of, be in like the community space. And well, I think with the addition of we're kind of repeating ourselves now, but I'm reminding myself. It'll be more something like this, where we're expecting the client to send there'll be a superset of what you might return in supports, and we'd somehow have to handle the problematic thing that clients like Apollo might do. We'd somehow have to handle this issue.
And I think that's okay. Like if you're doing this as like a standardized thing, you just say, you need to be able to expect that this can be any type and any concrete object type that can occur at this position and any interface that any of those concrete types implement. And I think I would just limit it there. From a client spec perspective, I would say this should only be used with single level selection sets, and like deeper ones are undefined. Like we don't explicitly reject them, we just don't support them. Because
Well,
you only
my
want to
my
support the like common case, right?
well, my spec does, because no, we want to support connections as well, I think. And so the spec has the path, I guess, which would support
Yeah,
connections.
sorry, I didn't describe myself well. I meant nested selection sets, like on line 47, if you'd put a selection set inside of media there that then had further filtering on type or whatever.
Um, okay.
Like technically you can get from, say you returned a book, right? Actually, concretely a book. You can do a selection set on book to give you media, and then you can do a selection set on media to give you um, podcast. But podcast can never be what the field's saying. So I'm just saying don't allow that kind of chaining. Just don't worry about it. Only
Okay.
the top level filters would matter.
Okay. And then you're basically suggesting that in addition to what's kind of in the RFC, that clients could respect like a match types directive to do like a runtime transformation to something like this. And then match types would just be like have to be like a signal into um the cache. I feel like as a
Yeah.
community spec, that might be harder to get buy-in for and to implement because that's like extra work for Apollo client and Relay to do versus if we don't do the match types thing and we just like the spec is just like as a human, write this somehow. And like
Yeah.
the validation rules on the server will take care of making sure if it's valid, which I think is
Well,
basically
you've
just like the RFC that I have already.
you've got two
And
parts to this anyway, right? You've got the server, the schema must support this feature, and then the client should populate this for you. And those are two separate parts. Like step one, make it possible. Step two, make it easy. And make it easy is optional. Like
well,
main thing
the
is make
server
it
that we
possible.
the server doesn't need to like have any support for this. I mean, like yes, like the validation would be nice, but like this doesn't need that server implementation to work.
Sorry, I should have been more specific. The schema, the schema that the user has written needs to have a supports argument that it can populate.
Yes, yes,
So
yes, yes, yes.
step one is you need like that thing has to exist in your schema. That's what the connection spec is, right? The connection spec says build this thing into your schema, and then clients can do cool stuff with it. And the mutation payload object spec is similar, and the object identification spec is similar. Add this thing into your schema in this particular form, implement this interface, and then your client can do magic stuff like normalized caching. And this is another one of these, like add a supports argument to your field in your schema and make it work in this particular behavior. And then your client can, when it sees a selection set like this, it can say, oh, just give me these ones.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm going to do both things then. So I will kind of just like look in to see if this like new special selection sets in texting could work somehow. Also thinking of like connections in the background, but the primary thing, which I guess I'll focus on, is writing up the RFC that I currently have into a spec, but like a like a userland spec. And then if it could live in like a like GraphQL slash community spec or something, that'd be nice. But if not, I guess I'll figure out some other home for it. And yeah, I think that's a good landing point for now. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can sort out a home for it as well. I don't see that as being a problem. But step one is to get some buy-in. So
Yeah.
good luck. But I think that
Cheers.
this is something that we need to solve. It's definitely an issue that many people have had. I mean, there wouldn't already be a solution for this in Relay if this wasn't a problem. So it's definitely a problem. It definitely needs a solution. Ideally, it needs a solution that is standardized across all clients. And so, yeah, thank you for championing this, and very much best of luck in continuing to do so.
Cheers. All right. See you, Benji.
All right, cheers, Mike. Bye.
Bye.